the screen over here. All right, there's my screen. All right, thank you everybody for attending the webinar. We're going to do a little bit of automating of STK in Excel. So there's a couple of ways of doing that. We're just going to do it in Excel directly with VBA. VBA, if you're not familiar with it, it's very similar to all the other flavors of VB script or VB.NET. If you're not familiar with it, don't worry about it. I think the most complicated thing we're going to do is a for loop. So either way, you should be all right if you're familiar with VBA or not. What we're going to do is basically interface with STK and Excel. We are going to build a few things in Excel and then pass that over to STK, and then pull a few things back. So create some reports and pull those into Excel and display those. I'm going to use STK 11.2, the latest and greatest. If you have something older, you should be fine. None of these things that we're doing changed lately. The same with Excel. I have Excel version 2013, but if you have any version of Excel from the last 10 years, it should be identical to what I do, what I'm doing. Maybe the GUI will be slightly different, but the way things work are the same. I think Craig noted the license. You do need an integration license to connect from some outside application to STK and automate everything, but you should have received that in an email. Also, I'm going to do a lot of copy and pasting, so just so you don't have to watch me type. And we have the code snippets. If you want to copy and paste as well, you can download those. I believe the link is in the chat video. You can download that. It's just a PDF. There's a couple of sections. You can just copy the appropriate section and paste it in, or you can just type along if you feel like it. All right, let me start up Excel here. And I'm just going to just start a blank workbook. So we're going to use the developer tab. If you don't have this tab up here that says developer, just right click anywhere up here in the GUI panel, go to customize the ribbon, and right here check this developer checkbox, and if you hit OK, you should see this new developer tab. The way this works is there's a Visual Basic editor. Let me move that to the screen so everybody can see that. And that's basically where we'll put all our little scripts. So if you ever happen to close that, it'll pop up automatically in a minute when we start adding buttons. If you ever accidentally close it or can't find it, just go back to the Visual Basic button and you should get back to it. So let's get started with STK. So first we need to start a new instance of STK. So in this exercise, we will basically add a whole bunch of buttons, and each button will do a little task. So we'll have a button for starting STK. I'll have a button for creating a new scenario. And then there's another button that loads a couple of objects into our scenario and so on. And if you want to add a button in Excel, if you see this insert panel, click on that so you get all the options that are available. And the first one right here, if you hover over it, it tells you button. Click on that and drag out a little box. Don't make it too big. Excuse me. Just put it somewhere on the side because we'll use a lot of the other columns to write data into. So I'll keep my buttons in the ABC column. You can really put them anywhere you want, but you may be blocking yourself later on. All right. So once you add a button, you drag it in, it asks you to assign a macro. In our case, we are going to launch STK, a new instance of it. So let's give this an appropriate name. I'll just call it launch STK, and then push the new button. And here's the Visual Basic editor that pops up, and this is where we have, we'll have one of these subroutines for each one of our buttons. And while we're here, I'm going to rename my button. If you just click on it, you can rename this. I'm going to name this the same as my my little subroutine. Launch STK. We'll have, I don't know, 6 or so of these just to keep them straight, which one's which. All right, let me go back to the editor and we'll start declaring a few variables and set up a few things. So first we're going to need a couple of global variables. Let me do that first and get it out of the way. So we're declaring this root object. If you are familiar with the object model, basically you always declare a root object and everything is a child off of that. So you have your scenario as a child of the root, and then the objects in your scenario are children of the scenario. But you start out with the root object. So we're going to create this root object in our first routine, and then we'll use it later on, but we'll set it as a global variable, just so we have it. We also need this application object, and it'll hopefully make sense in a minute. Oopsie. There you go. And we also need a global variable for our scenario. We're going to create a new scenario. That's when we set all the parameters for the scenario object. But later on, we're doing a few things where we need, for example, a scenario start and stop time. And just so we don't have to recreate the scenario object, we just declare it as a global variable here. So we'll have these 3 global variables: app, root, and scenario. So now we can start starting up a new instance of STK. The way you do that in VBA is, so we set app equal to create objects. And if you look at the IntelliSense, it already tells you what it expects. And this is not anything STK specific. If you wanted to start, I don't know, a Word document or a browser or something from Excel, you do the same thing. You do create object, and then instead of STK, you tell it, create a new Word document or open up a new browser or whatever it is you're trying to do. So we have to tell it we want STK dot application in quotes and parentheses. And you spell application right. That's probably useful. All right, so set app is create object stk.application. This will start a new instance of STK. If you already have STK up and running, just to show you, you can do the same thing, and there's a get object command. It requires 2 variables, a path name, which we don't have, so we'll leave it blank. You can either put an empty string in there or just leave it blank. And then again, what are we trying to connect to? We're trying to connect to stk.application. So either one, they do the same thing. So the first one creates a new instance of STK. The second one, if you already have STK up and running, you would connect to that. So just to show you, I'm actually not going to use that. So I'm going to comment it out. And a comment in VB or VBA is just a single quote. All right, so we're slowly getting there. By default, the application is hidden somewhere, and we just want to see it just to make sure it's up and running. So you can set the app to visible, just app.visible, and it will show on your screen. And the last thing we do in here is create that root object that we, or declare the root object that we already set as a global variable. So STK has 2 personalities. We'll take the second one. So there's just root equals app dot personality 2. There's an older object model that's just personality, and then at some point we realized there's a better way, and we came up with this personality 2. So that is what we're going to use. All right, well, let's see if this works. If we save this, let's see. Save it, and I am going to save it as a macro-enabled workbook because we have all these macros in it. Otherwise, you may run into some security issues. And I'm just going to put it on the desktop. Let's see. Excel webinar. Doesn't matter what you call it or where you put it, as long as you remember where it is. All right, so let's see what happens. I'm going to push this button here, and hopefully STK starts up. Doing something promising. It's on the other screen. Let's see if I can drag that over. Once it's up and running, I'll drag it open. Oh! Let's give this another try. Did I misspell this? Oh, app.visible, I have to actually set it to something. Equals true. Sorry about that. I'll keep running. Well, let me just start over. Stop this guy and hit the launch button again. Let's see, object does not support. Oh, that's awkward. What did I misspell? Create object. Let me make sure I have this typed correctly.
Is it STK 11?
No, it shouldn't matter. Let's see. Save it again and just hit run here. That's not good. This worked not too long ago.
What Jens is accurately demonstrating here is a frustration that I think a lot of you coders have experienced before.
All right, I must have misspelled something here. I'm not exactly sure what. Set app, create object, STK.application app visible is true, and then root. Oh, I think I forgot the set for the set root. I believe that was it. All right, so all is well. So that started up STK. So let's actually create a new scenario, just so we have something to play with. Let me show you a little bit the help here. Let me start up a browser for you. So we can see what I'm doing here. So I went to help.agi.com. You can go there as well, or you can just watch me on the screen. Whatever works for you. So what we have is we have this root object. So let's take a look at what this is all about. There are two helps. There's a regular help that's just a desktop help, and then there's the programming interface help. So what we're looking for here is the programming interface help, and I'm just going to search for it. The root object is of type IAG STK object root. And here it is. So what we're trying to do is create a new scenario. So here's the new scenario method. We can see what it expects. It just expects a string that is the scenario name. And well, let's create one of these guys. So back in Excel, add another button. I'm going to put these all in a row, one under the other. You can put them wherever you want. So insert a new button, and I'm going to put it, somewhat same size. This one we're going to create a new scenario. So I'm just going to call it create scenario. And click on the new button, and it will create this new subroutine in your Visual Basic browser. Again, I'll rename this one here as well, the button. Create scenario. All right. And let's see, just so you don't have to watch me type, I'll just copy and paste a few lines in here and then explain what it actually does. So here are, let me format this a little bit more pretty. And you should have the same ones in the PDF that we sent the link out. So the root.new scenario, I just showed you that. Where did the browser go? Right here, new scenario. It expects a scenario name and it doesn't return anything. So here's what we do, root new scenario, and I'll just call this webinar. So now we're going to set up a few properties of that scenario. So we need to get a handle to the scenario. And let me go back in here to the root object. One of the properties is current scenario. So we're going to go to root.current scenario, and that will return the actual, it'll return an IAG STK object, which has all the properties in it. So that's what the set scenario equals root.current scenario has come from. And in VBA and VB script, you need the set part. If you just have a simple variable, like a double or a string, you don't need the set. But if you have anything more complex, like a scenario object, you have to add the set part to this. Then we're going to set the start and stop time of our scenario. And again, this is in the let's see, okay, this is in the AG scenario object. Here, so we're going to set the time period of our scenario, and that's right here. It's one of the public methods. Set time period, it expects 2 times, a start time and a stop time. And you can either put in the actual time in STK's usual format, or whatever you set as the default. Or there's a few shortcuts like today. There's also now or tomorrow. And then instead of a stop time, you can also say, something like the 20 plus 24 hours. It's just the time after whatever your start time is. So you can make this, plus 1 day or plus 1 year or plus 17 seconds, whatever you want. And it'll automatically compute the stop time for you. And just so the graphics are up to date and everything's reset to the beginning of my today epic, I'm going to do this root.rewind, which basically is the equivalent of hitting the reset button in the GUI to have your animation start over at your start time. All right, let me save this real quick and let's give this a try, see if these buttons actually work. So I'm going to launch STK again. And it's starting up on the other screen. Let me move that over. And then push the create scenario button, and that should create a new scenario. It moved back over here to the other screen. There it is. It's called webinar, just like we told it. And we look at the property. It starts today. It goes for 24 hours. And the animation is reset. just like we told it to. All right, so now we can do start doing actually Excel-y kind of things. So let's start with pushing data from Excel into STK, and then later on we'll go the other way. So let me go to my spreadsheet here, and what we'll do is we'll just create a whole bunch of facilities or targets here, just in random location around the world, and then we will create those in STK using a little VB script. So I'm going to, where's my mouse? Here it is. If you're following along and copying and pasting, we're going to do this in columns F, G, and H. So column F is going to have the target name, and I will type that in. Then column G is the longitude, actually latitude, sorry. And then column H is the longitude. Let me make these a little bit wider so they all fit in. So we'll have, 25, I think is what we have, targets. And they're just at random locations around the world. And then we'll load them in. All right. Just because I'm not original enough to come up with something interesting, I'll call this one target 1. And then we'll have target 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. But let me just finish one real quick. Then the latitude is between minus 90 and 90. So I will do a random, let me open parentheses, rand is just a random integer, not a random double between 0 and 1. There's also rand between, where we could say random between minus 90 and 90, but it only returns integers, which, it's probably good enough for an example like this, but I'll go with the regular rand. So random is between 0 and 1, and I want it between minus 90 and 90. So I do rand minus 0.5. That'll give me a random number between minus 0.5 and 0.5. And then I'll multiply this whole thing by 180, and that should give me a random number between minus 90 and 90. And there it is. And I'll repeat that for longitude. I'm just going to drag this over to have the same, have the same formula, just so I don't have to type it again. But instead of going from minus 90 to 90, we want to go from minus 180 to minus 180. And all we have to do, just multiply it by 2. So you can either times 2, or you can just do this times 360. And once you update one cell, it also updates the other one. All right. So now, instead of just having one of these, let's create 25 of these. So select the 3 last lines of those, those 3 columns, just the last line, and pull it down until you feel like stopping, but at least 25. There you go. And we now have the location for, well, I have a couple too many. I'll just load in the first 25 targets around the world. And you can look at the values. The latitudes are all between minus 90 and 90, and the longitude is between minus 180. There's one very close to 180. And we'll all have different values, but they should be somewhat evenly distributed around the world, and a good number will probably be in the water, but doesn't matter for now. All right, so let's load those in. Let's add another button here that loads these targets. So go back to Insert and the button, and create another button right here. So this one I'm going to call Insert Targets. Insert Targets. And if I hit New, it'll create another Insert Targets over here. Let me put a little space. And I will call this Insert Targets as well. and I will try to spell it correctly. Targets. There it is. All right. So now you can go to copying and pasting unless you want to type. Let me copy this in here and then explain what exactly it does. All right. So we're looping through from I equals 2 to 26, which gives us 25. We want to start at 2 because our first, let me show this. Wait a second. I messed up. There you go. I was going to start at 1. If you just copied me and did the same thing, you can always update this from I equals 4 to somewhere. So I'm going to loop from I equals 2 since the first line is just the header. So from 2 to 26 right here. I am going to create a new target. I create a new object. And let me show you in the help where you can find all these things. Let's see. So we have this current scenario, which we create here. Let me just start out with there. Current scenario. All right, that is of type IAG STK object. Let me click on that. And this guy has a children's property. So we can do, I need more space. So that's where the current scenario.children comes from. And we want to create a new one. Okay, so the children is of type IAG STK object collection. And here is new. And that's what it expects. So it wants to know what type of object do we want. In our case, we want targets. And then it also expects the name of this new target or this new object as a string. So let's take a look at this AGE STK object type. It's just an enumeration. If you use something that has IntelliSense, it'll come up, and instead of having to put in the number, it'll tell you, okay, we want an E target, and then it knows what the enumeration is. In our case, we don't have that, so we want a target. These are all the objects you can insert into STK, and it turns out that this is the one we want. It's 23. So we want a root.currentScenario.children.new. We want an object of type 23, which is a target, and then it wants the string for the name. And what we want is to just pull the name from the spreadsheet. So in our case, it's just whatever is in this cell F2. And the way you do that in VBA is just range, and then you specify, which cell. So in our case, it's F, and with the ampersand, that's how in VBA you concatenate strings. So in this case, first time through, when I is 2, it pulls whatever is in cell F2, which is target 1, and then you need dot value because that gives you the string of what's actually in there. So this command right here, first time we run through it, it should create a new target, and that new target should be called target 1. Next, we're going to move that in the right location. And we could look at the help again. So we have this target object is what it returns. The target object has a position property, and you can assign the position in various types. You can do it in geodetic, like we'll do, and expects latitude, longitude, altitude. You can do it in Cartesian if you have the X, Y, Z values. It basically duplicates whatever you see in the GUI. So in our case, we are going to put it, the The latitude will be whatever is in column G, so it will use this minus 35. Then the next is whatever in column H, the longitude, and the altitude I just made it 0. And for some reason, if you set it 0 to 0.0, Excel converts this to a pound. It also, there's a few cases, you've seen this up here, the not used, not used, not used, where usually most languages, you can just leave it blank. You just set, scenario.set time, you set it today and plus 1 day. Excel has a few quirks, or VBA has a few quirks where it expects something back even if, STK doesn't return anything. So I just use this not used variable, and I just, say not used equals whatever it is I want to set. And the same applies here to the assign geodetic. All right, well, let's see if this works. I'm going to save it and start clicking the buttons again. So launch STK. There it is. Oh, I'm blocking my button. Create a scenario. And it keeps popping up on the other screen. I'll put this over here and make my Excel a little bit skinnier so we can see this, and insert targets, and there they are popping up all over the place. And if you do this, you will have different random numbers, and your targets will be at different locations. All right, so we have those. Let's add a satellite, and then we can compute some access and pull access into Excel. So next button, I'll make this bigger again, just so there's room. Again, insert, the new button, under insert targets, I'll call it insert satellite. And without a space. And new, and I'll call this insert satellite. All right, here's my new insert satellite subroutine. So this one I'm going to do a little bit different. I'm going to use connect instead of the object model. You can do, you can kind of pick and choose. There's some tasks are either easier with connect, some tasks are easier with object model, but you can pick and choose and combine them in any way you want. So I could, for example, create a new satellite with the object model and then set its properties with connect, or the other way around. And let me copy these next commands and paste them in here just so you don't have to watch me type. Oh. Oh, yeah. And there you go. There's depending on where you copy and paste from, I'm not sure if you can see that, there's basically these regular quotes, and then there's these angled quotes. I'm sure they have a name. But STK expects the, or I guess Excel as well expects the just the simple quotes. And just back to connect. If you're not familiar with connect, it's all documented in the help. Let's see if I can find it. I'm going to open the regular help. Integrating with STK, I'll just show you where it is. Connect, getting started, input and output. Basically, they're just strings you format in the correct way and then send to STK. So there's a command name, that's what it does, like a set position if you wanted to move a facility somewhere, or a set state if you wanted to set the initial state of a satellite. Then you have to specify which object that's applied to. And say you had, we have our 25 targets. You have to say, okay, I want to move, target number 2. And then there's a command data that actually specifies where you want to move this and in what format. And the individual commands are documented in the help as well. So I'll leave that as an exercise to the user. So there's the new command. It creates a new object we want of type satellite, and that's the name of it. And then we're setting the initial state of it. So here's set state. We have to specify which object do we want to set the state for. Oops. We have to specify what coordinate types. Do we want Cartesian or classical or all the other ones? The propagator, 2-body or HPOP or J2 or whatever you want to use. The start and the stop time. You can either specify the start and stop time individually or just say use the scenario time period. The step size, the reference frame, the epoch, and then your 6 orbital elements. And by default, STK expects distances in meters. If you just want to make sure, if you're not sure what units STK expects, you can ask it. I don't have it open right now. I'll show you in a minute once STK is up and running. So I have to start it up just to show you what it expects. All right, so let's try this real quick just to see if it works. I'm going to launch STK. Create a scenario, and it's on my other screen. I'll move it in a second once the scenario is open. Right here. Insert the targets. And insert a satellite. There it is. I just made it a simple LEO satellite that's polar. The reason I picked polar is because, the location's all over the world, and if we compute access, we want to cover basically every random location we may have picked. So it's just a simple, let's go back. It's, what is this? 7,200 kilometers, semi major axis, inclination of 90, and all the other orbital elements are 0. All right, so let's compute access between the satellite and one of our targets. And now, instead of pushing things from Excel to STK, we're going to pull data back into Excel. So we're going to compute access. While we have it open, let me just show you what we're doing. We're computing access from our satellite. Access to, you can pick your most favorite targets. I'm just going to go with number 1. And we are going to pull this data up here into Excel. That's the plan. All right, well, let's do that. Back to creating another button. So insert button, and I'll put it on the bottom of that. I'll call it compute access. And new, which closes down STK, and I'm going to call the button the same as I called that little subroutine, compute access.
Yeah, and it's a quick question. Why does STK close after we do the macros?
It's just it starts a new instance and connects to it, and then it basically kind of resets itself a little bit, and then it loses the connection to STK. All right, so let's compute access. Let me find the right commands and copy them in, and then we'll go through those real quick. I'll format it so it's easier to read. If you're familiar with computing access, you basically, you need to know from which object to which object. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're using the object model again. So we have to define each one of those 2 objects. So here's the satellite. I just call it satellite 1. It's just root. There's a couple of ways of grabbing an object that already exists. I use the root.getObject from path, and you have to specify the path to the satellite. In this case, I call it LeoSat, so that's it. And then repeat the exact same thing for the target. So I have this tar1 variable, and I set it to root.getObject from path, and here's the path. Then to compute access, it's just, access is the from object dot get access to object, and then the to object. And then to actually compute it, there's access dot compute accesses. So that takes care of computing it. Now we have to pull out that report I showed you a minute ago that has the access number, it has a start time, it has a stop time, and the duration. And that is what the next part does. Let me copy this whole section here. I'll put it in the same. We don't need another button for that. We already have a whole bunch of them. We'll just put it to the end, just insert at the end of the same little subroutine that we already have. All right, so we have, let me just format this a little bit so it's easier to see. And I could probably multi-select these. There you go. All right, so we are going to say we want to pull back the access data providers. Of course, now I don't have STK open anymore. But if you create a new report, that's, well, let me just create it. Just so I can show you where this comes from. I'm just going to create a default scenario. There it is, almost. Any minute now. There it is. All right, let me close this, make my room. Let me add just 2 objects. I'm just going to put in a satellite, and I'm not even going to propagate it, and a target. So access, and there's this report and graph manager where we specify what we actually want to compute. Here's a new report. So this, where'd it go? Access data is basically, I'm saying I want to pull something out of this access data folder. And if I pull the whole thing back, it returns all these values. If we only care about a few, we can specify it, or we can just, pull everything back and ignore everything we don't really want. All right, so we want this access data provider. We have to actually compute it. So that's where the data provider.exec, and it expects a start time and a stop time. And this is where the global variable that for the scenario comes from that we declared all the way on top here. Because the scenario, we're just using the scenario start and stop time. So this computes all the data. It's the equivalent of computing that access report I showed you a minute ago. So now we just have to pull all the data out. So first, I'm going to, just like we did here, write a little header so we know which column contains what data. And basically, there's the results data set 0. It's in the same order as, where did it go? Access data. So number 0 is access number, number 1 is start time, 2 is stop time, 3 is duration, and so on. So here we're getting the header for these for those 4 variables, and we're writing those to Excel. So I'm going to use column J, K, L, and M. So J will be the access number, then K the start time, L the stop time, and M the duration. And then we're going to loop through all the data that it returned and write it to the appropriate cells. So, just like the header, we will just write the data under it and in the appropriate cell and the variable. So let's give this one a try, see if it works. I'm going to save this, and unfortunately, since STK shuts down when you change things in Excel, we'll have to go through the whole routine again and start up STK and add the targets. but that's pretty quick. All right, I'm going to create a scenario. And it's over here. Insert some targets. Insert a satellite. And now when I compute access, here it is. It'll give us the access number, the start time, the stop time, and the duration. Excel has a habit of formatting things in a weird way. It doesn't quite know what to do with the time. If you actually select the cell, you can look up here and see that it's correct, but it doesn't display everything correctly. So what you can do is right-click on this, format cell, and specify what you want, or it's already in the template right here. We can do this with a script. Right here. So I want to select all of column K and basically use this format: day, month, year, hour, minute, seconds. And then I do the same for column L. So that's the start and the stop time. So if I run this again, here it is. So now I have a start time and a stop time and a duration in the way I want this formatted. Yes, so that's more or less how you pull data and reports from STK into Excel. There's a lot of variables where you can just query what the value is and then pull it back and get it. There's another tool I wanted to show you that may make your life significantly easier that we already built. I'm sorry, and it's called the Excel add-in. You can download it from our website. Let me show you where that is. If you go to agi.com and under support, software downloads, they're going to make me sign in. Yes. All right. Under Other, there's this Excel add-in, and let me just show you how that works. Once you download it and install it, basically you go to the, under Developer, go to Add-ins, and you will have this STK add-ins showing up once you install that. You then have to restart Excel, and after that you get this add-ins tab right here if you don't already have other add-ins in here. What this allows you to do is basically pull reports and graphs straight into Excel from STK that already exist. So let me show you how this works. So first you have to connect, either create a new instance of STK or connect to a running one. I still have this one here up and running, so I will connect to that. So that's what this button does. So either create new or attach to existing. I'm attaching to that. All right, that worked. Great. So now, hold on. Now you have to watch which cell is selected. So I'm going to select an empty row over here. So this is, you can extract data from STK into Excel, or you can push it back in. So I'm just going to show you a simple example of pulling data into Excel. So you push the button, the pull in data, you pick your favorite object. I'm going to do the satellite because it actually moves around and it's more interesting. And then these are all the data providers. Like when you create a custom report, these are all the options you have. And you can just select which ones you want. I'm just going to pick the latitude, longitude, and altitude of the satellite over time. So there's an LLA state. I want the fixed frame. I only care about time, latitude, longitude, and altitude. I don't really care about these for now. You can pick the start and the stop time and the step. And once you like what you see, you hit generate, and it pulls all these right in for you. So this makes your life a lot easier if you want to pull data from a report in STK into Excel. You can just use this this Excel add-in. Just select which columns you want, where you want them, hit generate, and it pulls all the data in. And I believe that's more or less all I have for you now.
Sort of. We do have 2 questions here that I think will be beneficial to people. Ismir asked, why did you pick connect for some commands and object model for the rest?
It's mostly user preference. I could have done everything in Connect or everything in the object model. There's a few things that are nice in one and few that are nice in the other. For example, pulling data in, like we did for the access report, is a lot easier in the object model because you can specify what you want and then you get an array of your access number, an array of start times. You could do the same with Connect, and it would give you basically one long string, and you have to parse it, which works as well. But it basically doesn't matter. You can use either one or a combination of both. But sometimes one's a little bit easier, or sometimes the other is a little bit easier.
And the final question is from Rick. Can you do this from other Microsoft Office products like Access or PowerPoint?
Yeah, you should be able to do it from anywhere. I don't think I have Access installed, but I have PowerPoint. Let's see if I can start it up. And let me bring it over here. And just like, I have to turn it on. Customize this ribbon. There is a developer tab. And where is it? And then, just like in Excel, you can add a button into your slides, and then add exactly the same VBA script that you had in Excel. So it's probably more useful in something like Access than PowerPoint, but you can do it in any of these Office products.
Okay, thank you, Jens.